The United States has a long tradition of providing substantial military and financial support to Israel. But recently, this commitment has taken on proportions that have drawn attention both for their magnitude and their strategic implications. When it became public that approximately 20% of the U.S. stockpile of missiles was being allocated to bolster Israel's defenses, along with a disbursement of around $1 billion in aid, experts, journalists, and political analysts began to debate the extent to which this effort reflected national security priorities, diplomatic interests, and long-term geopolitical calculations. First, because DOD missiles are not mass-produced in the same way as conventional armaments. Their manufacture involves cutting-edge technology, complex integration processes, and high costs. Each unit requires rigorous testing, specialized oversight, and certification before it becomes operational. When a superpower shifts strategic resources of such magnitude to a single region, it inevitably raises concerns among other allies. Other Arab countries, which have gradually established ties with Israel through normalization agreements, might view the military reinforcement as an unbalanced advantage, requiring compensation through new cooperation negotiations or purchases of advanced equipment. Thus, a domino effect is created. With each new defensive layer implemented by one side, the other side seeks to develop more sophisticated offensive capabilities to overcome it. European countries and NATO members may question whether this support upsets priorities, considering that they too face emerging challenges, for example, the war in Ukraine and cyber threats from state actors. The approval of emergency funds enjoyed bipartisan support, something increasingly rare in America's polarized political landscape. By committing a substantial portion of its stockpile, Washington signals that it is still willing to project power, despite domestic pressures to reduce military spending and demands to prioritize other theaters of operation. The crisis in Ukraine, the growing challenge of China in the and simmering tensions on the Korean Peninsula all compete for resources and attention. In this context, allocating such a significant part of its missile defense capacity to protect Israel is simultaneously a declaration of priorities and a calculated risk. They carry symbolism, trigger chain reactions, and shape global perceptions of who is willing to make concrete commitments to their allies. The future will show whether this reinforcement will be enough to contain emerging threats or will trigger new cycles of arms races. For Israel, it is an essential reinforcement. For the United States, another demonstration that its presence in the Middle East remains non-negotiable, at least for now. Lawmakers from different ideological currents converged around the idea that ensuring Israel's military superiority is essential for both Middle Eastern security and U.S. strategic interests. This creates a window of relative vulnerability, as part of the missile defense response capability is temporarily compromised. Still, those responsible for shaping strategy judged that the political and strategic benefit outweighed the operational cost. Some senators emphasized that Iran has been expanding its capacity to produce missiles capable of striking not only Israel but also American bases in nearby countries, reinforcing the argument that threats must be anticipated before they materialize into large-scale attacks. The Israeli public, constantly exposed to air raid alerts and emergency sirens, sees American support as a reassurance that, even in extreme scenarios, there will be means to protect the civilian population. In addition to the immediate costs of transferring and replenishing the missiles, there are so-called indirect costs, which include transport, logistics, installation of compatible radars, technical training for operators, and the creation of integration protocols with other Israeli systems. All of this drives the investment far beyond the unit purchase price of each missile. Each aid package reinforces not only immediate defensive capabilities, but also diplomatic relations and American influence in the region's security architecture. At the same time, it fuels debates about budgetary priorities, the risks of escalation, and the balance between solidarity and autonomy. This aspect is rarely discussed in depth, but reveals how modern military assistance involves long-term contracts and commitments that span legislative cycles. Yet this prolonged dependence also fuels debate about the sustainability of the partnership in the long term. Some critics argue that the country should invest even more in its domestic defense industry to reduce vulnerability in case U.S. priorities shift in the future. Certain American political sectors, more inclined toward isolationism, argue that this financial commitment should be invested in domestic infrastructure and security. By transferring such a significant fraction of its arsenal, Washington signaled that it was willing to assume temporary risks to its own defensive capabilities to ensure Israel remained protected against any sudden escalation. Second, because this decision entailed a billion-dollar investment in replenishment, maintenance, and logistical support. This figure does not refer merely to purchasing the missiles themselves, but includes transportation, operational infrastructure, military training, and maintenance contracts. To understand how this point was reached, it is first important to consider the regional context that led the United States to mobilize a considerable part of its arsenal and financial resources. Since the early days of the Cold War, Israel has played an important role in containing adverse influences in the region, acting as a forward ally that shares intelligence, collaborates in technological development projects, and contributes to relative stability amid local rivalries. It is part of a network of financing agreements, arms supply contracts, and technological partnerships that ensure Israel maintains a significant qualitative edge over its neighbors. Every year, the United States allocates billions in direct military aid, and this extraordinary sum was, in practice, an emergency response to further strengthen Israel's defensive posture. Despite appearing, at first glance, to be a purely supportive act, the package also serves as an element of deterrence, making it clear that any large-scale aggression would face a combined retaliation with direct backing from Washington. Today, the U.S. stance remains based on two pillars: protecting Israel's security, considered an essential ally, while at the same time containing the expansion of Iranian influence, which is expressed through the funding of militias and missile programs. The Middle East is one of the most volatile regions in the world, marked by historical rivalries, territorial disputes, and sectarian tensions. Unlike systems such as Iron Dome, which is dedicated to neutralizing short-range rockets and artillery, DOD operates in an upper layer of air defense, intercepting threats in the final phase of their trajectory as they are about to strike the target. This mechanism provides the user nation with a decisive advantage by creating an additional barrier against precision attacks, reducing the likelihood that missiles will penetrate the defensive shield. Although Israel already has a combination of different systems, the addition of this equipment represented not only a technical improvement, but also a political message of unwavering commitment from the U.S. Israel, which faces threats from multiple fronts, whether from armed groups with access to short-range rockets or regional powers, capable of developing ballistic missile maintain defenses that can respond swiftly to different types of attacks. In recent years, Iran has consolidated its missile program and deepened alliances with armed factions opposed to Israel's existence, heightening the risk of large-scale conflict. The DOD system, which stands for Terminal High-Altitude Area Defense, is one of the most sophisticated pillars of America's ballistic missile interception capability. The dispatch of 20% of America's stockpile of this weaponry drew attention for two main reasons. When analyzing the logic behind this mobilization, it is clear that America's strategic interest goes beyond simply defending an ally. The approximately $1 billion investment, therefore, cannot be viewed merely as an isolated military expenditure. However, the decision also carries consequences that go beyond the bilateral relationship. Another sensitive issue is regional perception. Iran will certainly interpret the delivery of DOD missiles as an escalation, even if defensive, and may accelerate its long-range missile programs in response. Domestically, Israel receives this assistance with relief and expectation. The financial complexity of the shipment is also not. The U.S. Congress itself played a decisive role in making the package viable. Internationally, the delivery of DOD missiles and the release of extraordinary funds also act as an indirect message to other actors monitoring U.S. behavior. The decision also forces the Department of Defense to expedite replenishment contracts, revisit production schedules, and reassess how to distribute its stockpiles across global bases. In summary, the delivery of DOD missiles and the billion-dollar injection into Israeli defense illustrate how contemporary military alliances are built upon layers of logistical, political, and technological interdependence. The history of this mobilization demonstrates that in the world of great powers, military decisions are never simply about sending weapons.